All right, good morning. Welcome to week 10 of biology. This week we are going to go over photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Basically, like how do we take the energy we consume, or how do plants take the energy that they consume and make it into the usable pieces of energy that our body can use and work with every day to go about our everyday kind of functions. So a couple things I just want to touch on here. Let me share my screen. Um, there. So here we are in Biology B. Again, we are on week 10. Some of you still need to finish up this stuff from week 9. So our unit 5 assessment. So there you had your regular, let me just open this real quick for you guys. So here you have your assessment choice board. So you had the Unit 5 test, you had a Charles Darwin website activity, or you had a make your own Google slide activity. So whichever one works for you, just make sure to complete that, get that in so that I can get it graded. As always, please don't forget to do your discussion question. That gets you 4.5 points back. Your discussion question will get you 4.5 points back on your assessment. So please, work on that and do the work you need to. And all it does is help to raise your grade. So this week, again, we have photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Next week, what we're going to do is we have a makeup week. So next week, as you guys might know, you have state testing. So a lot of you might have to drive a little ways throughout the state to get to your state testing. I also have state testing next week. I have testing Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So I will be busy all of those days. So with that being said, I just wanted to give us a makeup week to make up any assignments that we've missed, and anything, that you guys might want to catch up on. Not to mention with state testing, I really think that's where your focus should be next week. So this week, we're going to introduce a new topic, and then next week, you'll have the time to focus on making up any assignments that you need to make up. All right, so let's jump into photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Oop, go back a little bit. Sorry about that. All right, so we think about photosynthesis, we think about plants, obviously, but a big thing we need to think about is why are leaves changing color in the fall? Well, the leaves are going to change color in the fall because of the chloroplasts that are inside, and those chloroplasts are colored different pigments. So we have chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, which are both green, and then you have then you have the carotenoids, which are yellow. This is also what is going to be in carrots and give them that orange color. And then you have the anthocyanins, which are going to be red and blue. So let's talk about chloroplasts for a minute. Where are we going to find chloroplasts? They're going to be located in the leaves of the plant, and these are going to contain the enzymes that are necessary for photosynthesis to occur. So as you can see, they're nice and green, and that's because all of the thycoids inside of them and the stromas and things like that. They definitely contain, so the chloroplasts contain chlorophyll. That's where they get all that green color from. And what chlorophyll is it's a green pigment that absorbs light for the energy for photosynthesis. So where is a plant going to get its energy from? It's going to get its energy from light, or, the biggest thing we think of is the sun. Our biggest light source is the sun. All right, so what is light? Light is a form of energy. White light is just a mixture of all the visible light that we can see. So when it's passed through a glass prism, you might have learned about this in some of your earlier science classes. White light is separated into the visible spectrum of Roy G. Biv. Okay, and so you can see all the different colors here. So you got red, orange, yellow, green, blue. They don't even show you indigo, but it's in there somewhere. And then violet as well. Okay, so with the chlorophyll light absorption, what ends up happening is that the green color is the one that's getting reflected, and all the other colors are getting absorbed. So now let's think about something. If the chlorophyll doesn't absorb any green, do you think the green light can be used for photosynthesis? I'm guessing not, because it's actually not being absorbed into the plant. So it's all the indigo and the violet, that are being absorbed for the photosynthesis. One second, sorry about that. All right. Please do me a favor, when you get a minute, jump into the slideshow here and watch where the mass of the plant comes from. Like, where is the true weight of the plant? What does it come from? Please take a look at that video and answer that question. All right, so there's different types of nutrition. So we have heterotrophic nutrition, which means that heterotrophs, we've learned about already, are going to consume their nutrition from the environment, from other plants, from other animals that are out in the environment. Our typical consumers are going to be animals and bacteria. Then we also have autotrophic nutrition. So what autotrophic nutrition means is that these are going to be plants or algae that are going to make their own food. They're going to use photosynthesis to make their own food. So we typically think of plants and algae. Right? So heterotrophic means other feeder, and autotrophic means self-feeding. All right, so let's think. So a tree is going to be autotrophic. A snake is going to be heterotrophic. Algae, autotrophic. Grass is a plant. So it's going to be autotrophic. A grasshopper is actually heterotrophic because it's going to eat something else. And then a squirrel is, again, heterotrophic. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the chemistry of green. Please take a minute to watch this video. And then once you watch this video, go through and answer these questions and learn just a little bit more about photosynthesis there. All right, so then we're going to talk about like the work life of the plant, like what happens, like how is the plant going to get food? So what the plant needs is it's going to take some sun, it's going to take some carbon dioxide that we breathe out, obviously, and it's going to take some H2O, some water. That is all going to be absorbed by the plant in some way or another, go through the chloroplast, and the chloroplast is then going to release oxygen as out into the atmosphere, and then it's going to uptake these sugars and use those sugars to grow. A fun fact about photosynthesis is that 90% of photosynthesis on the earth is carried out by the algae in the seas and in the lakes. So it's not really all, all the big trees you see, everything like that. It's really mostly all of the algae we see in the sea and in the lakes. Okay, so photosynthesis is produced by autotrophs, and this is where they convert light energy into chemical energy, organic compounds that they can use for food. So they uptake the water, they take in the carbon dioxide. Literally, leaves are porous, so the carbon dioxide flows through it, and then that carbon dioxide is picked up through the leaves, through the different chloroplasts, picks up the sunlight. Then again, it produces simple sugars and oxygen. Just said again, photosynthesis takes place in the chloroplasts in the leaves of plants. Okay, so what's inside of a chloroplast? We have the thylakoids, which are sac-like photosynthetic membranes. They're arranged in stacks called garna, and they contain chlorophyll. Then inside, you also have the stroma, the region outside of the thylakoids, which is the stroma. And they just kind of create this protective layer around the thylakoids. So the reactants, and we've learned about reactants and products before, the reactants of photosynthesis are going to be the sun or light energy, the water, the H2O, and then carbon dioxide. Okay, the products of photosynthesis are going to be glucose. It's going to be the C6H12O6. That's the simple sugar of glucose that plants need to grow. And that's an organic compound, i.e. how we have chemical energy. And then it's also going to release oxygen. Oxygen is going to be another product of photosynthesis that is going to get released back into the world that we need to breathe. So the reaction process is going to look like this. You've got water, carbon dioxide, sunlight, some enzyme processes happen in there, and then it produces the glucose and the oxygen. Okay, that's going to be written out in a nice little formula here. C6CO, and 6H2O will yield C6H12O6 plus 6 oxygens as well. Okay, now that we've gotten through kind of like the basic process of photosynthesis, we need to focus a little bit more on the two-step process part of it. So there's the light reaction part of it, and then there's the Calvin cycle part of it, and they work together to transfer the light energy into the chemical energy of glucose. So here's the light reaction. What ends up happening is the light energy splits the water into two pieces, into two hydrogens and an oxygen. And then it produces the glucose and the oxygen. Okay, So what you'll have here is with the two hydrogens, you'll have just oxygen, then you'll have the NADPH, and you'll also have a little bit of ATP. We know from earlier that ATP is energy. So this is going to be the energy that the plant uses. This is all going to occur in the garna, which is in the thycoids of the chloroplast. Okay, so the chlorophyll gets really excited and its electrons move into a higher orbital once it receives the light energy. It's going to split the water, and then the oxygen is going to be released. That's going to go off into the world. It doesn't need it. Then it takes up the hydrogen, and it takes, by using its coenzyme of NADPH, and then it forms NADPH. Okay, and then the energy is stored as ATP that the plant can use to grow. Here are just a couple of different examples of it that you guys can take a look at to show the process of how the energy is created. So the second part is the Calvin cycle. So this is what is actually going to occur in the stroma, not in the thycoids of the chloroplast. So this is the part where in the Calvin cycle, they use the CO2, the NADPH, and the APT to synthesize glucose into the chemical energy. Okay, so in the Calvin cycle, the energy is stored in NADPH, and the ATP is used to convert CO2 into pGal, and then that chemically stable it's a chemically stable 3-carbon compound. The pGal is then converted into glucose, okay, and then the plant can use that glucose. So here's the glucose down here. Okay, so first the light comes in, goes through the light reaction process. Here you see here the NADPH is created and the ATP. Those two items enter into the Calvin cycle along with the CO2. They circle out and it will produce NADPH plus and NADP, and then also the sugar for the plant. Again, this is the same thing that we just looked at, just a little bit different. Okay. Okay. Oh, yes. So just a little bit of a review here. So we have a plant, which is known as an autotroph. The process is represented in this diagram above is going to be photosynthesis. How would you write out this process? You're going to have the CO2 plus the water plus the light, which will then produce the glucose and the oxygen. And the bubbles are going to represent the oxygen that is released back into the atmosphere. Perfect. Here's a little bit more about the leaf structure. So the leaf structure is composed of 6 different layers of the cells, each with their own specific function. So you have the cuticle, you have the epidermis, you have the lower dermis, the pestle layer, the spongy layer, and the stomata. Each of these different structures have different functions. So the cuticle is a very waxy layer and it helps to reduce water loss in the plant. The epidermis is going to be this outer leaf surface that provides protection for the plant. The pestle layer is packed with chloroplasts. So this is where all of that photosynthesis is happening, those light reactions, that Calvin cycle that we just talked about makes photosynthesis occur here. Then you have the spongy layer down here, and this is the space that allows for gas exchange. And then, yep, they're perfect. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about vascular bundles. So in vascular bundles, you have the xylem that transports water from the roots up to the leaves. Okay, so down from the roots all the way up here and takes all the water and puts it all the way up to the leaves. And then you also have the phylum, which transports the nutrients from the leaves down all the way to the roots. Okay, so it's really just a constant process of, water going up to the leaves for, to help with photosynthesis. And then in the phylum, what it helps with is it helps the nutrients come down from the leaves into the root system to help the plant grow. Okay. We also have the guard cells and the stomata. So guard cells open and the stomata close the pores in each leaf, which allows the exchange of CO2 and oxygen to pass in and out of the leaves. Obviously, the plant's going to need CO2 for that Calvin cycle process that we just talked about. And then the oxygen is going to need to be released because that's a product of photosynthesis and the plant doesn't need it. And so the plant releases it in the air. So obviously we can breathe it. This transpiration occurs when water evaporates from the stomates in the different leaves. Okay. The stomata help to create homeostasis, which we know means creating a stable environment within the plant. So the stomata and the guard cells help to maintain a constant water and gas exchange at homeostasis and a stable environment for the plant, so it doesn't get too dried out. I don't know if any of you are plant people at home, but this is the whole thing about making sure that we water our plants, because that's how they're going to stay with this constant water and gas exchange. If they don't have any water, obviously they can't maintain homeostasis and they might die. So let's put it all together. How's this plant going to make a living? How's it going to survive? It needs sunlight. Okay, so the leaves are going to collect the sunlight, and that's also where the photosynthesis is going to occur. What's going to happen to the gases? How are the gases going to go in and out? They're going to go through the stomates. Okay, so the stomates are going to allow the gases to go in and out, the CO2 and the oxygen. Where's the water going to come from? How's the plant going to get water? It's going to take it from the soil. So the roots down here at the bottom are going to take up that water and take it all the way up into the leaves. And also it's going to need a little bit of minerals to help it grow as well. Also, it's going to get from the soil. Okay, just another example of what a leaf structure looks like. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about ATP and how it's used to form energy by the cell. Do me a favor, again, please watch this ATP and respiration video. It will just help you better understand ATP and what it is. So ATP is a currency of biological energy. And so what that means is that, this ATP is it's like the golden money of what we need to survive, what plants need to survive, what we need to survive, kind of what like every organism needs to survive. This is like the golden energy. Let's talk a little bit about adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. All the activities in cell are powered by this chemical. Okay, and so here you have the adenosine and then the triphosphate. So tri means 3, so 1, 2, 3 phosphates. Okay, and it's also going to have a ribose sugar in there as well to combine the adenosine and the phosphates together. Okay, so there's a little bit of a difference between ATP and ADP. So ADP is a diphosphate group, so that means it only has 2 phosphates. And it's very similar to ATP, just has the 3rd phosphate group. The cells store energy by adding a phosphate group to ADP to produce ATP. ATP is like a fully charged battery cell, whereas ADP is only partially charged. So what do you think is going to happen when we remove a phosphate group from ATP? Is it going to go back to ADP? All right, so how are we going to release energy from ATP? The energy stored in ATP is released when high energy chemical bond is broken. So how are we going to break that bond? The energy stored in that bond is then able to be used to digest in the body. Okay? All right, so we're going to need that information to jump into cellular respiration here. So what cellular respiration is, it's going to be the breaking down of food glucose to produce ATP. So transfer of stored chemical energy of glucose, again, into the usable form of ATP. This occurs continuously inside of mitochondria in both plants and animals. Okay, so we've got breathing, a little bit of cellular respiration there. And as you can see, cellular respiration also has a chemical formula. And if you look at it really closely, it kind of looks a lot like our photosynthesis cycle, but in reverse. Okay, so here's what happens in cellular respiration. You start off, your reactants are going to be glucose and oxygen, and then they're going to break down with some enzymes to create ATP, which is our sugars in this case, or and that, which is our energy. So it was light energy on the other side before, and now it's ATP, water, and carbon dioxide. Okay, so you start off with C6H12O6 and some 6 oxygens. Then you're going to release 6 ATP, some water, and some CO2. We breathe out CO2 just like plants breathe out oxygen. So what is happening inside of the mitochondria? Okay. Oh, sorry. You've got some enzymes. They take in food, they take in oxygen. Okay. This happens inside the mitochondria. It goes through that process with the enzymes. It releases ATP, CO2, and oxygen. Okay. There's different types of cellular respiration. We have anaerobic cellular respiration. This type of respiration uses no oxygen at all. It occurs in the cytoplasm. And then you have aerobic respiration, which requires oxygen, and that occurs in the mitochondria. Okay, so we remember learning about mitochondria from our first semester. It has two different membranes. The outer membrane covers the organelle in which it contains, and then the inner membrane folds over many times, the crista, increasing the surface area to help with those chemical reactions that we're talking about here. The matrix is very fluid inside of the mitochondria to allow these interactions to happen. Okay, so here we go. Here is cellular respiration again. So we've got our glucose coming in. Okay, it's going to go through glycolysis and release an ATP. Might go, if we're keeping the oxygen, if the oxygen is coming with it, it's going to go through the Krebs cycle and release an ATP and some CO2. And then it's going to go through electron transport chain, which we talked about in our first semester, and it's going to release ATP. Then comes off the water and a little bit of oxygen needs to come in. If we're going to do it without oxygen, we're going to go through a process called fermentation. This is what's going to happen most of the time when you're talking about bacteria. If you're going to make an alcoholic beverage, it's going to go through the process of fermentation. Okay, another time this happens is when our body can't get enough oxygen. So if we're working out really, really hard, our body's going to start producing lactic acid. That's like when your legs, like if you're running or something and your legs start to hurt a lot, like that, you start to get that stinging pain. That's because not enough oxygen is getting into our body at that time. So our body kind of goes through this process of fermentation, or an anaerobic part of respiration, and that's where we get this lactic acid from. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about glycolysis. And so during glycolysis, this is going to be the breaking down of glucose into 3 carbon molecules of pyruvic acid. Okay, so the extra H's are the ones that were picked up by the NAD plus and translated into the NADH. Okay, it produces 4 ATP molecules with a net gain of 2 ATP at this time. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about cellular respiration or fermentation. There's no oxygen. Okay, so what happens down here? So with here, obviously you have no oxygen. It's not there. Yeast, bacteria, all those sorts of things. Okay. Without oxygen, and this also happens in bacteria because a lot of bacteria don't have mitochondria, so they can't do the process of cellular respiration without this process. Okay, so they take it into their cytoplasm and then they can get their energy that way. Okay, it only makes a very, very, very small amount of ATP, only 2. Okay, as opposed to the 36 that large animals cannot survive on this alone. That's why we have to go through the cellular process. That's why we breathe oxygen all the time. Okay, so alcohol fermentation, as formed by yeast, it takes in glucose, it produces then ATP, CO2, and alcohol. This helps to make beer, bread, and wine. Okay. We also have lactic acid fermentation, which I talked about a little bit. It's going to be performed by bacteria and animals. It's also going to cause some muscle cramps. You're going to have the glucose, which is then going to take 2 ATP and the lactic acid. Then you're going to have the bacteria, which could also make yogurt, sauerkraut, pickles, and cheese. And then animals, they're going to feel muscle fatigue. Obviously, runners, this happens to runners a lot, and just, kind of every day when people are working out. All right, so now let's go a little bit past. So we talked about glycolysis. So now what we're going to do is we're going to jump onto what happens after glycolysis if we do have oxygen. Okay, so if we do have oxygen, it's going to go through the Krebs cycle. And so if you jump back to that video from a couple slides ago, you can watch from 6:45 to 11, and that'll explain it a little better. What happens there is it's going to occur in the mitochondria. The pyruvic acid is going to get broken down into CO2, okay? And then the NAD plus and the FAD are going to pick up hydrogen atoms, which are very high energy electrons. Okay, then from there, through the Krebs cycle, it's going to go through the electron transport chain. Okay, so this is the process where we talked about the different channels and the energy flowing in and out of the cell wall. Okay, so this is where the high energy electrons of NADH squared and FAD are going to convert into ADP and ATP, which we're going to use for energy. Okay, and then oxygen is going to serve as the final electron of H acceptor to help form water. Okay, so big summary of cellular respiration here is that you're going to take in some glucose. This is going to then go through, or sugar, food, anything you want to call it, it's going to go through glycolysis. It's going to put in 2 ATP, it's going to release 2 ATP, and then it's going to have it's going to have steps that it can go down here. Okay, so it goes down it's going to take 2 pyruvate and it's going to go through the Krebs cycle, releasing some CO2, releasing some more CO2, releasing a little bit more of ATP. And then it's going to create these 2 NAD and keep creating these. And then those will then go through the electron transport chain. Okay. And then from there, from the electron transport chain, those with the hydrogen will create some water. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's going to yield 36 ATP. 2 from up here, 2 from in the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain is going to yield 32 of those ATP. As you can see, this all works together as a big cycle. So the plant takes in sunlight, okay, it goes through the process of photosynthesis, then the animal eats the plant, and it goes through the process of cellular respiration. The animal is going to release carbon dioxide and water through the process of cellular respiration, which then the plant needs to uptake to go through photosynthesis again. Then the animal eats the plant, and it's just a circle, and it just keeps going and going and going. All right. Well, that's all I have for you for today. Thanks for hopping on today. I really appreciate it, guys. Please, as always, reach out if you have any questions. I look forward to hearing from you.